Forgiveness. Almost all of us have had to deal with it at one time or another in our lives, especially forgiving someone very close to us. And for those of you who've clicked on this now, maybe you have someone in your life you need to forgive. Maybe you feel like you've partially forgiven somebody, maybe not entirely. Hopefully, this video will be of some help to you. I did a video on forgiving my mom about 10 months ago, and I'll link that up in the thing at the end of the video so that you can click on that. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did in that video about my mother, but I think it's I don't want to repeat, in other words, everything I said in that video. I'll tell you some things today, but so the couple of things kind of have provoked me doing another video on forgiveness at this point. And one of them is I did a live stream on it yesterday. And by the questions that were asked in the live stream, I realized people did have a lot of interest in forgiveness, but also there was a lot of questions about it. So I wanted to address some of that today in this video. But the other reason is because a few weeks ago on the video I did about my mom, like 10 months ago, I got this lady who commented. She actually said she enjoyed my video, really appreciated my, tone and what I said, but she said it didn't really help her. And that really stuck with me because one of the main reasons I do this channel is to help somebody. Hopefully someone out there that maybe hears the right thing at the right time, and maybe from the person that for some reason it clicks with them. So the fact that it didn't help her it really upset me a little bit, because I thought, she didn't go into detail about her situation, but I thought she must be dealing with something really, really difficult that, is hard to maybe forgive a family member or someone else. So I'm doing more of a deep dive on this video as to what are the specific things that I did, especially to forgive my mom. In other words, the specific factors along the way that I implemented to help forgive my mom. Okay, so that's the purpose of this. So just a little bit of background. Like I said, I don't want to go into a lot of repetitive thing about, you can watch my other video and hear more of the backstory of my mom. But the short version is my mom and we had kind of a troubled relationship, especially as I got older, like over the age of 30 years. But my mom always had issues, and a lot of that was based in her childhood. She had a very troubled childhood, a very difficult childhood. And I think she had some issues at being able to really be a good mom. Like, she wasn't a horrible mom. Certainly I've heard much worse stories from people about one or both of their parents. But she had issues in really connecting on a level that was very deep and very real, because to me, once you're a mom, you're always a mom. I don't care how old your kids are. If you're 90 years old and your kids are 70, you still feel like they're your kids. And it's not the same as when they were little, but you still should have the same feeling of love towards them and concern. And I feel like my mom blocked that out after both my sister, who was older than I was grown, and then after I was grown. I think she detached. And it was a strange kind of detachment, because I'm not really sure how much she was actually able to love. Let's just put it that way. So I can tell you, I can share a story with you to show how much I was really kind of fooled about my mother early on. And because when I was a teenager, my dad had died when I was 10, and I was just basically with my mom until, from then on. And then my teen years were actually, except for the sadness and the grief that continued over my father, my teen years were good years, were happy years. And I was successful in school, and I was popular at school, and I had friends, and it was not a horrible time in my life. And my mother went through the motions of being a good mom. In other words, I really thought she was a good mom because she did all the right things. Now, the problem was her heart wasn't really in it. So the feeling underneath it all was not what it would maybe typically be for a loving mom, but she did do the right things. Well, when I went off to college and in my sophomore year of college, the first indication that I really had that there were problems was I went in for counseling. The first time in my whole life. My mother had never sent me for counseling, which I probably sorely needed after my father died. And I went in for counseling my sophomore year because I was struggling. You know, they talk about something called the sophomore slump. Maybe they don't talk about that anymore, but back when I was young, they did. And it's kind of like you're reassessing like what you're majoring in, what your goals are in life, that sort of thing. And I went into the counseling center and I had a limited number of sessions, but I must have talked a lot about my mom in the sessions. And the counselor, of course, saw it very differently than I saw it because she was just hearing what I said. And I remember the last thing she said to me, which I'm sure if she's still around out there and she still remembers a strange sophomore named Allison, she would be she would be able to say, "Yes, I said that." But the last counseling session, she looked at me and she said, "I'm going to tell you something now, and you're not going to believe it. But I hope you remember it, and I hope someday you realize that it may very well be true." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "You have a real problem with your mother." She said, "I don't think you're ready to hear that, but you have a real problem in your relationship with your mother." Now, she was the first person. I was what, 18, 19 years old at that time. She was the first person to ever actually say that to me. And I did remember it. I've remembered it all these years. And later, when I sought further counseling in my late 20s, I remembered it. And I remember saying it to the counselor I saw then and had to start kind of working on some of the issues that, had come up in my childhood. So, yeah, there was a problem and it was there for a long time. But as I pointed out in my last video, the problems got worse as my mom got older and began drinking. And, you know, she basically deconstructed as a person. She became very isolating. She, was hiding her drinking or trying to hide her drinking from people. She didn't she just wasn't much of she was kind of a shell of a person, let's put it that way. And so I had some real issues around that. But as I pointed out in my last video, at some point in time, I had to really look at the relationship with my mother. And I had been in counseling and off and on since my late 20s. And I finally had to really work on this. I had to really work on this issue around my mom. And I knew that I had to forgive her. Now, the reason I knew that is because there's an old saying that if you keep holding on to anger and resentment, it will just hurt you. It will just continue to hurt you. So I knew that I had to let go of that. The old saying goes, resentment is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. Yeah. So it really only hurts you. And I knew that, and I'd had counselors point that out to me. So I knew that I had to let go of that. I had to let go of a lot of the issues I was continuing to have because it wasn't something that was just done to me as a child. It was actually something that was going on at the moment when I was in my 30s or 40s or, even into my 50s. I knew that I had to start forgiving. So let me talk about what are some key aspects of forgiveness. So the first thing is you can't forgive before you're ready. You just can't forgive before you're ready to do it. You can't force yourself, in other words. You can say all day long, I really need to forgive that person. But if you really don't want to, there's not enough motivation to do it. It's not time. So you've got to kind of lay the groundwork. And so the groundwork, a lot of that is working on your own issues, working on your own self-care and helping yourself and overcoming some of your own issues before you really plunge into that area of forgiveness. It is really hard to forgive someone else when you are incredibly messed up yourself. It just is. You really have to do some work on yourself first, okay? So you can't force it. You got to work on yourself first. And then as I said in my last video about this, forgiving is about healing yourself. It's for you that you're doing it. It's not about the other person, really. So it's not about you making some grand gesture and saying, "Oh, I forgive you," because that's not really the point of forgiveness. The forgiveness is to feel it in your own heart, that it affects your own psyche, your own well being, and that you can move on from a lot of the negative feelings around it. That's really what the forgiveness is about. And if it has a ripple effect onto the other person and your relationship with them, then great. But it really is first and foremost about you. So you have to forgive for yourself, not for the other person. And that is, a really important aspect. Another important thing is that we're all wounded to some degree. Every person out there has flaws. Every person out there has imperfections. Every person out there has probably, okay, I'll say almost every person, has done something bad. There might be some people who have never done something wrong or something bad, but I would say the majority of people have at some point in time. So we're all flawed. We all have the potential for bad in us. In other words, for doing something bad. And recognizing that often makes us more compassionate towards the wrong done by others. Okay, it often makes us more compassionate to the wrong done by other people. And I think that's an important thing to take into consideration. So, all these things that I've just talked about play a part in how you have to start to forgive. So, in dealing with my mom, the very first thing I had to really do was I had to acknowledge her faults, but also understand where they came from. I had to really have compassion for the wounded person my mother was. If you're not able to do that, then you're not really ready to forgive. You have to really understand, the old saying of you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, or you stand in someone else's shoes, or something like that. It's true. You have to be able to do that to really be able to forgive. So I had to really have an understanding of what my mother had gone through in her early life that made her who she was, that wounded her in such a way that she didn't know how to really fully be present as a mother. And I think that was a key first step. The second thing I had to do was be more mindful of myself on an ongoing basis. In other words, mindful and present with myself, and realize what was going on. The forgiveness doesn't happen just like, oh, I can just forgive and I'll be done with it. It has to kind of come up and down in waves within yourself. Like I'd feel very forgiving 1 minute, and then 2 days later I might not. But I had to pay attention to that. And I had to journal things if I needed to, or vent my feelings in some way to be able to truly forgive. Because this type of forgiveness isn't a sugar coating. You can't just slap it on and say, oh, gee, that's it, I've forgiven. It has to really come from deep within you, especially in such a critical relationship as this was. So that was very, very important to do that. And then I had to let go of that resentment that I talked about earlier. The poison that's going to just kill you. So I had to let go of that. I was very, very resentful of all the hurts I felt like she had done, whether they were warranted or not. I had a hard time with that, and I had to be able to really release that. And that, again, does not usually happen overnight. It's a process. You have to work on that. Every few days, you got to be aware of it again and go, am I feeling resentful still? I was sharing on the live stream that I did about the fact that my sister, who's 7 years older, I still struggle with the forgiveness with her right now. And the reason I know that is because the resentment will bubble up every once in a while, and I realize, I haven't gotten there yet. So you have to become very aware and honest with yourself about how you're feeling. And I think the most important thing that helped me be able to forgive my mom was a very important concept, which is choosing love over hate. Choosing love over hate. This cannot be overstated. It is the kernel, the seed of everything. to be able to say, I realize I could easily hate someone for this, but I'm choosing love. And again, you can say it and maybe you don't feel it yet, but the more you say it to yourself, the more you will feel it. And I think that is the thing overall that won me over about being able to forgive my mom. Because in the end, I did love her. I always loved her. There was never a time that I truly hated her anyway, but I didn't want to hate her. She was my mother. She had nurtured me when I was a baby. She had been there for me as a small child. And like I said, she was not the worst kind of parent. It wasn't hard because I did love my mom. And that never changed. As much as she, acted indifferent to me or said something mean or cruel or whatever, never wavered. I did love her. I always loved her. I don't think she believed that I loved her, which was interesting. But that was based on, I think, her own insecurities. But that's the thing that really pushed me over the top on this. I was able to say to myself, I love her in spite of all her flaws, in spite of everything she's done or hasn't done. And I don't want to, and this is the key part, I didn't want to feel guilty when she died. I didn't want to feel guilty when she died. And my mother lived to be 90 years old, amazingly, in spite of at least 20 years of hardcore alcoholism. She did. And I was 60 years old at the time. And I didn't feel any guilt when she died. I knew that I had stayed in touch with her. I had tried to be kind to her in my words. And I also had boundaries with her. I didn't let her walk all over me and be mean to me. I would change the subject, or I would get off the phone and say, I'll talk to you in a couple of days or whatever. But I was able to not feel any guilt because I knew I had done my best. And as I pointed out in my last video, I didn't totally forgive her by the time she died. I was a lot of the way there. But after she died, and that's something there was something interesting that happened after my mother died, and I'm going to kind of give you a teaser on this. I'll either share this in another video on this channel, because it was kind of interesting, some things that happened after she died. But I'll let you know more about that later. Yeah. And but that's kind of what it was able to put me over the top and really be able to forgive her all the way. But it is important to note that forgiving is not forgetting. Forgiving is not forgetting. You don't forget what someone did. Yesterday in my live stream, someone asked about, if you've forgiven somebody, then they come back and they do something horrible to some other people in the family. Like, how do you deal with that? Well, you only did what you could. You forgave them for whatever it was they did to you. If they continue to be a horrible person, that's on them. That's on them. And you don't have any control over that. So all you can do is do what you can, which is that lift the hatred and the resentment from your own heart and be forgiving and hope for the best. Hope for the best, because that's really all you have control over in that respect. So I can only tell you how it was for me in this instance. I hope this has helped a little more. I went into a little more depth on some of these issues. And I know some of you out there are dealing with a family situation or someone close to you that it's a much more difficult situation to forgive. I hope that you can find your way to forgiveness, because it will do nothing but help you. It will help you psychologically. It will help your stress level. It will just help you deal with life so much better. But I know it's difficult. And if you can only find your way to partial forgiveness, or any progress you make is at least better than nothing. So on your journey, I wish you well with that. Until next time, be well. Keep moving forward. Be kind and take care. Bye.